Hello, and welcome to another live chapter reading of The Unholy by Paul DeBlassie III, as presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue. Lightning streaked across a midnight dark sky, making the neck hairs of a 5-year-old girl crouched beneath a cluster of 20-foot pines in the turquoise mountain of Aztlan stand on end. The long wavy strands of her auburn mane floated outward with the static charge. It felt as though the world was about to end. Seconds later, lightning struck a lone tree nearby, and a crash of thunder shook the ground. Her body rocked back and forth, trembling with terror. She lost her footing, sandstone crumbling beneath her feet, and then regained it. Still, she did not feel safe. There appeared to be reddish eyes watching from behind scrub oaks and mountain pines, scanning her every movement and watching her quick breaths. Then everything became silent. The girl leaned against the trunk of the nearest tree. The night air wrapped its frigid arms tightly around her, and she wondered if she would freeze in death or, even worse, stay there through the night and by morning be nothing but the blood and bones left by hungry animals. Her breaths became quicker and were so shallow that no air seemed to reach her lungs. The dusty earth gave up quick bursts of sand from gusts of northerly winds that blew so fiercely into her nostrils that she coughed but tried to stifle the sounds because she didn't want to be noticed. As she squeezed her arms around the trunk of the pine tree, the scent of sap was soothing. Finally, the wind died down and sand stopped blowing into her face. She slowly opened her eyes, hoping she would be in another place, but she was not. In fact, the reality of her waking nightmare was more obvious than ever. Wide-eyed with fear at the nightmarish scene playing out before her, she clung to the tree. In the distance, she saw her mother raising a staff with both hands, her arm muscles bulging underneath her soaked blouse. Directed straight ahead, her mother's gaze was like that of an eagle, her power as mighty as the winds and the lightning. The girl loved her mother, and through her mind sent her strength so that she would win this battle, and the two of them could safely go away from this scary place. The girl turned to follow as her mother's gaze shifted to an area further away and so dark that only shadows seemed to abide there. To and fro, her mother's eyes darted before fixing on a black-cloaked figure who emerged from behind a huge boulder surrounded by tall trees whose branches crisscrossed the sky. He was much bigger than her mother, at least by a foot, and his cloak flapped wildly as winds once again ripped through the mountains. Swinging a long, hooked pole, the man bounded toward her mother like a hungry beast toward his prey. His black cloak looked like the wings of a huge bat as they reflected the eerie light of the full moon. As his pole caught the moonlight and a golden glow bounced back onto the figure, the girl saw his face, with its cold blue eyes that pierced the nighttime chill. He seemed to grow bigger with each step, and the girl's heart pounded so loudly that she was sure he would be able to hear it. The stranger stopped a short distance from the girl. Crouched low between rows of trees, trying to make herself disappear, she saw him clearly as he threw his head back and let out a high-pitched cry like a rabid coyote. The air crackled, thunder struck, lightning flashed. She was blinded and then could see again. Quick as a crazed coyote jumps and bites, the man struck her mother, his black cape flapping wildly in the wind. The girl leapt to her feet, her legs trembling, her knees buckling, straining to see through the branches. She was terrified. The moon vanished behind dark clouds rolling overhead. Then came a scream of terror that cut to the bone. Now the night was lit up again by lightning flashing across the mountain range, and the girl could see the black-hooded man hit her mother again and again. Her mother crumpled to the ground and stopped moving. The girl's hands flew to her open mouth, stifling a scream. The man stood over her mother, his long pole poised in the air, ready to strike again. A twig snapped in the forest, and the girl spun toward the sound, holding her breath. Then she saw 3 gray forms, slowly creeping toward her through the darkness, and recognized them as wolves. She was not afraid as they encircled her, their warm fur brushing her skin. One after another, the wolves lifted their snout and looked into her eyes, each silently communicating that she would be protected. Her mother cried out again. The girl turned and saw her rising to her feet, then striking the man's chest with her staff. As he batted his pole against her shoulders, her staff flew out of her hands, landing yards away in a thicket of scrub oak. Her mother screamed and blindly groped for it. The girl jumped up and then stopped when the black hooded figure looked her way. Tears clouded her vision, and all she saw was darkness. Tears rolled down her cheeks, dropping into the tiny stream of water running beneath the tree she was clutching. She looked down and saw the dim reflection of her frightened self. As she peered through the trees to catch sight of her mother, a wailing wind blew the man's cloak into the air, making him again look like a monstrous bat. Once more he swung his rod high and smashed it against the back of her mother's head. She saw and heard her mother's body thump against the hollowed trunk of the lightning-struck tree and slump to the ground. The evil man bent over her mother's limp body and howled. Suddenly, the girl felt arms encircle her waist, and she was swept away, deeper into the forest. She sobbed, and at first let herself be taken because she had no strength. But then she became angry and started pushing against the arms carrying her, trying to escape and run back to her mother. She wanted to make her mother well, and then this nightmare would stop and they can go away. "Hush now, child," said a voice she recognized as that of her mother's closest friends. "The man cannot harm you, mijita. As long as you are with us, we will make him think you are dead. But you must be very quiet. Ya no llores," the woman warned, raising a finger to her lips. The woman then carried her into a dark cave illuminated by the light of a single candle. The cave was frightening, with shadows of what appeared to be goblins and demons dancing on the red sandstone walls. "I will return for you. You will be safe here," the woman said. The girl watched the woman walk away, shivering as a breeze flew through the cave's narrow passages. Closing her eyes, she rocked back and forth, imagining herself safe in her mother's arms, then opened her eyes to the light of the full moon shining through the mouth of the cave. The shadows on the walls were just shadows now, no longer goblins and demons. As she slipped into a trance, images flickered in her mind. She saw the woman who had brought her to this place, scattering pieces of raw meat around the open mesa where her mother had struggled, helped by two other women the girl could not identify. Suddenly the scene shifted to a stone ledge jutting over the mesa, and she heard the pounding footsteps of a man running toward the woman. The girl felt her heart race and her breathing quicken, afraid that the bad man would spot them and kill them. Then the image shifted again, and she now saw on the mesa 3 gray wolves circling the raw meat and the man walking away from the granite ledge. As he left, she heard his thought, "The child is dead." Chapter 1. A chilly autumn morning wind swept over the grounds of the Iglesia de Psychiatric Hospital. Claire Sanchez walked along the red brick path to her office in the administration building, where she had worked as the director of mental health workers and natural therapeutic services. She stopped for a moment to gaze over the more than 2,000 acres of high mountain desert 3 miles south of the plaza in the region of Aztlán, homeland to generations of peoples whose ancestors once crossed the Mesoamerican border to settle what is now the American Southwest. Aztlán was considered by natives to be the Axis Mundi, navel of the world. Aztlán was the land of herons, of the 7 caves, of the mystic beauty of horizon to horizon turquoise blue skies, arid desert mountain air, and great swells of earth-like reclining nude goddesses. Aztlán was home to the Katsinas, rain spirits, Tlaloc, the lightning god, and the feathered serpent deity, Quetzalcoatl, who unites earth and sky, eternity and the death-defined world. The turquoise blue sky arching overhead was an ocean of delight and refreshment for Claire. She enjoyed the sight of eagles as they glided effortlessly across the cloudless expanse, the pinon and aspen trees, with clusters of looping sagebrush dotting the arrows and mesas, the rolling hills sprinkled with Italian or Indian paintbrush, columbine, and cornflower leading the way to the base of the Sagrado Mountains that encircled the city. Claire glanced at the granite megalith rooted in the middle of the courtyard, with an inscription that read, "Dedicated to the faithful Hispanic and Native Americans of the Ekla Dai." The Ekla Dai was a wealthy, centuries-old church in Aztlán that prided itself on charitable care for its members, particularly the natives that populated Ekla Dai Hospital. Few, if any, of those admitted due to mental distress were ever discharged from it, remaining ministered to for the rest of their lives. Claire's passion was to alleviate people's physical and mental suffering, which she had the chance to do during the last 2 years at Ekla Dai Psychiatric Hospital. The hospital was full, the patient need great. Claire's single-minded intent. That morning, after her regular 4-mile run and shower, Claire had looked into her bedroom mirror and noted that her 5'3", 110-pound body appeared healthy and strong, inspiring her to get to the hospital to try to help her first patient's health. On some days, the sadness pervading the hospital seemed overwhelming to her. But when Claire felt most worn out and discouraged, she'd remembered the reason she had taken this job, her dedication to her people, the natives of Aztlán. A month prior to her graduation, the hospital's administrator, Carl Himmel, had written to the School of Natural Therapeutics. As there was a shortage of healthcare practitioners in Aztlán, especially those qualified to treat psychiatric patients, Himmel hoped the school would assist him in placing suitable practitioners with the hospital. The letter announced an opening for a licensed natural therapist with a background in mental health service work to work with Hispanic and Native American patients. This was an unusual combination of skills to request, since few natural therapists were trained in psychology, focusing instead on healing the body through massage as the primary course of therapeutic intervention. The fact that Claire had supported herself during her professional training in natural therapeutics by being a mental health worker at the Turquoise County Mental Health Center and also was a mestiza, Hispanic and Native American, prompted her to immediately inquire about the position. Her teacher's glowing letters of recommendation, along with her personal and professional qualifications, made her competitive for the position. Claire anxiously awaited a number of weeks before finally hearing from the hospital's administration. After driving to the hospital to be interviewed by Mr. Himmel, she was promptly offered the job at a higher salary than expected. Although she had been surprised by the immediacy of his decision, she didn't hesitate to accept his offer, even though her colleagues and teachers had cautioned her about taking on too much too soon. Dr. Himmel had made clear from the outset, that the patients of the Iglesia de Psychiatric Hospital were the worst of the worst, many dangerously psychotic. But something about their helplessness and hopelessness stirred Claire, making her want to work with them. And this passion and drive had never left her since her first day on the job. Arriving at the door of the brown stucco building, Claire took one last breath of the crisp mountain air, then opened the door, prepared for the pungent odor of disinfectant that she knew would assault her senses the moment she stepped inside. It never failed to momentarily daze her. Even though she'd been traversing this corridor with its dull green linoleum and sterile white walls every morning, 5 days a week for the past 2 years, she was never prepared for the stench. Each of the compound's 4 Pueblo-style structures, the administration building, the locked ward, the open ward, and the cafeteria and gymnasium facility smelled the same, like an overturned bucket of ammonia and water. After the initial shock, she always had to shake her head and steel herself before moving on down the corridor to her office. Approaching her office at the end of the hallway, she unlocked the door and stepped inside the room, which, although small, met the requirements of her patients and her own need for privacy. A year after being hired, she'd been promoted to her current position, the chief attending physician, believing she was the perfect employee to bridge the gap between mental health workers and natural therapists. Without hesitation, she had accepted the position since it would permit her to more effectively care for her patients. She directed clinicians to engage in more clinical services, to minimize meetings, committees, and bureaucratic dealings. Her leadership skills were noted and respected throughout the hospital. Claire hung her wool coat on an antique brass coat rack next to her old pine desk. The scent of pinon from an incense she'd burned the afternoon before lingered in the air, a soothing scent that she associated with her childhood. Raised in the culture of medicine, women of northern Aztlan, Claire understood the healing properties of natural fragrances such as pine, cedar, pinon, sage, and wild chamomile. To the Aztlan medicine women, the comforting smells of the earth cleansed people and places of bad temper and foul energy, the evils of life. The medicine women taught often caused the best of people to go down a bad path and need help. Medicine women in this tradition were said to be women of Lozen, the name of a renowned 19th century Apache woman warrior and healer who fought with the Geronimo and healed with intuition and caring. These healers had helped raise Claire when she had become a huerfana, a child orphaned by a mother's untimely death. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the reading. Bye.